Welcome to the Inside the Box podcast. I'm your host, Hans Zappin, and joining me on the show today is Brian Patton, commercial real estate extraordinaire. But before we get to Brian, I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by the Ed Isaacson Alpharetta Family YMCA. As I mentioned on the last episode, we are currently in fundraising season. I have been involved with the YMCA for a couple of years now, and I'm really proud of the things that they do for our community, including giving swim lessons to kids who can't afford them and don't know how to swim, summer camp scholarships, scholarships to their after-school program, all sorts of good things. And as I promised, anybody that is willing to give $100 or more to this year's campaign, I'm giving a shout-out on this podcast. So we had a few last episode. I have just one this episode, so challenged all the listeners. Reach out to me. Would love to get you involved. But last week, I had Walt and Margaret Knight donate $100 to this year's campaign. So thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Knight. And with that, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Hans.
What have you been up to?
Oh, just, selling real estate.
Is it selling?
Oh, yeah.
Like hotcakes?
Like hotcakes.
So I want to ask you a little bit about the market and the trends you're seeing and what you see are some challenges or opportunities in the next couple of years. But before I do that, I want to tell our listeners a little bit about you and your experience in the industry. So the Appins and Brian Patton have known each other for a long time.
Probably going back 20-something years, I imagine, yeah.
20-something years. We've worked together professionally and with some nonprofits. You're now the host of the Real Estate Success Podcast with Brian Patton on the Appin Podcast Network. Just wrapped up season 1.
Yeah, about getting ready to get geared back up for season 2. But, to answer your question, I started out in land planning at Mississippi State University. Came over here to Atlanta back in the early 90s. Worked for a large master plan development company, did some golf course architecture, did some large master planning for big communities. And then wound up during the recession of 90, leaving that job, going to the city of Lilburn as their brand new city planner, sort of directing their planning and zoning department. Then moved over to the city of Alpharetta. A couple of years later as a zoning administrator, where I stayed for about 10 years.
And around when was this? Your move to Alpharetta?
2005.
Okay.
No. 1995. Sorry. So 1995 to 2005 is when I was
the beginning of the trajectory upwards.
Yeah, it was a couple of years after North Point Mall was built. So it was right before we really started growing like crazy toward the end of my stay at the city of Alpharetta. And so, I've been doing real estate, getting my licensing and stuff, and just always loved real estate. Took some courses in college, and decided at that point I saw Alpharetta really about to boom, and thought, well, this is the time to do real estate full time. So I started my real estate company, which I guess going on 14 years ago now, 2005, and really started it, almost green. I didn't really know looking back, I can't believe I did it, because I didn't know a lot about what I was doing, but. I had the background in the planning part and the zoning, and I thought that would help, and it did. And I got some good help from some good mentors, and so we've been doing really well. It's a small firm, just me and a virtual assistant, and we got an agent or two. But we've kept it small over the years, and have sort of our market is mostly Alpharetta. I'd say 75% of Alpharetta, and then the rest is Roswell and Forsyth County.
And I would say recently with a lot of success in the downtown Alpharetta area. You've got this map that
my measles map.
Measles map.
Yeah, a lot of people found that humorous. I've sent out email blasts like most people do, and one of them I showed a map of every deal I'd sold or leased in downtown Alpharetta, and it did look like it had the measles. It was all red. And that's just the deals that I actually closed or leased. That's not the deals I actually worked on. For some reason didn't close. So, I do have a lot of experience in downtown. And of course, you and I were on a couple downtown boards together, and I love the downtown and what you see in Alpharetta from where we were, say 10 years ago, is absolutely amazing.
Well, I want to ask you about that because I don't think there's probably very few people who have the length of perspective that you do from mid '90s up to now, especially as it pertains to just the value of downtown property, the effect that it has on properties right outside the downtown area. What would you say has been the catalyst for that growth?
Wow. A lot of it goes back to the demographics of executives and where they want to live. If you see the growth of what really catapulted Alpharetta to the forefront was Windward, and the growth of Fortune 500 companies being there, and okay, this is where we want our offices, and then obviously it really started with executives living in the Alpharetta area and officing in Buckhead, and this was I guess mid to late 80s, maybe early 90s, and then they slowly started moving their offices out to Alpharetta area and thought, okay, we want to live. They were already living out here, and we want to be closer, tired of the commute. And you see that, that's sort of a city trend that you see, where the executives who really make all the decisions, it's not the employees. Executives make the decision where the companies are. They get tired of the commute and they want to work closer to where they live, and that's sort of what happened to Alpharetta.
So is it the schools? I mean, what about Alpharetta was more appealing at the time than Milton was, or South Forsyth?
Yeah, obviously Georgia 400. Transportation is huge. Schools are very, very important. Fulton County's got some of the best schools. Forsyth County's got some of the best schools, so that's hugely important. So it's a mix of things that are great that drive development. It's transportation, it's schools, it's climate, it's all those things. Alpharetta is really uniquely situated between the North Georgia mountains. You can be up to the mountains in 20-30 minutes. You can be riding through the beautiful mountain views in 20-30 minutes from Alpharetta, and you can be to the airport in 30 minutes or so. So from a geographical location, it's superb. You're near Lake Lanier, so there's not many places quite like that, and we're right off 400. We've got 3 or 4 exits off 400 now, which Milton doesn't have. Roswell has some of that, but
one.
So and I remember back. You're talking about the breadth of the knowledge that I have. I remember back when I was working at Alpharetta, the city center project, which we have now, which really is just, I guess you could say, coming out of the ground. Excuse me. I actually did the original site plan for that. Goodness, 20 years ago. Matter of fact, the city of Swanee came over and they said, "Hey, we heard that y'all are looking to build a city center." I said, "Well, yeah, we're in the planning process." So they came over and talked to us, and they went back and built theirs. And then
we kept planning.
And then years later we finally did build it. Which I think timing and recessions and all that had a lot to do with it. But I think the city council and all the developers have done a great job with it. And who knows if it had been quite as well done if we'd have done it back then. But a lot of areas got sort of ahead of us on that curve, but we're catching up, and it's a fabulous downtown project, and I was really pleased to be able to be small part of that when we first started doing the planning part of it.
And it looks like one of the next big projects, if you consider, and they're going to still be working on city center and looking at new and different projects downtown, but with an eye to the future, it looks like one of the next big things that City Council is working on is the redevelopment of North Point Mall. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've been keeping an eye on that, and you've got some thoughts on that and the direction they may head.
It's inevitable that a typical length of time for a mall like that is 20 years, and we're well over that time. We're 15 years over that. 'Cause it's built finished in 93, I believe. Mm-hmm. So we're, that would have been 2003. Am I doing the math right? 2013. So we're 6 years really past the life of a indoor mall. So it's time for that to happen. And it's not unique to Alpharetta. It happens all across the country. And people's shopping demands change a lot. That's why Avalon is doing so well. People want that experiential retail and restaurant. I was at a economic breakfast this morning up in Forsyth County, and Ken. I think his name's Ken. Yeah, Ken Shiver from the Southern Company was the speaker. He's one of the economists for the Southern Company.
Sharp guy.
Very sharp guy. And he was talking about retail, and that retail is really just 2018 was a good year for retail because their numbers stayed flat. His point was retail has been losing obviously to online sales. Online sales stay about average about 10% growth per year.
Mm-hmm.
And a good year for retail now is if they don't diminish in growth. And what he says we are going to see, and we're already seeing this, is that retailers that can make it are really these boutique retailers using smaller spaces. He reminds us of the Service Merchandise. You're probably too young to remember this, but Service Merchandise was a company, and you would go in to their store, and they would just have display cases of items. They didn't have it stocked. Like you think if you go to the store now and you see an item in stock, you pull it off the shelf and you go buy it. These were displays. And you'd fill out your little list of what you want to buy, and you hand it to the person behind the counter, and they put it, send it to somebody in the back there, and they brings it on a conveyor belt back up to you. Well, he says that's virtually what we're doing with Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a catalog, just like, so it's all cyclical. It's coming back around. And that's sort of how retail is now. The mom and pop retailers, they're pretty much gone. I mean, I remember the days growing up in a little small town in Mississippi. We went to Parker's Shoe Shop, and it was a guy that had been there 40 years. He owned the shoe shop. You go in there and buy shoes. Well, nobody buys shoes like that anymore. They buy them from big chains, and so all that has changed. I don't know if it's for the better or not, but that's where we are. And so, retail is all about either online sales, and if you're not the brick and mortars, if they don't provide something you can't get online, then they're going out of business. And so that's something we all have to deal with going forward with the economy.
Well, and to the point of North Point Mall, could you see something totally unrelated to retail, say a university, go in and create a campus there right on 400, put a MARTA station, high density residential, could make a lot of sense.
That'd make a great redevelopment play for that. Sure, you're near Verizon and all those, entertainment district. So yeah, who knows if that's going to happen? But there's certainly a potential for something like that.
Well, Georgia Tech, if you're listening, the city of the technology city of the South, Alpharetta, would love a Georgia Tech North campus. And so we're going to take a quick commercial break. And then when we get back, I want to ask Brian about maybe some of the downsides of some of this growth. So, as I mentioned, today's show is brought to you by the Ed Isaacson Alpharetta Family YMCA. The YMCA has been keeping families strong for more than 160 years. There's no joining fee this month, a savings of up to $100. We offer programs and services for all ages, making the Y a great place for the whole family. With no contracts and a price for every budget, discover all the ways the Y can make your life richer and help you achieve more. Visit the Ed Isaacson Alpharetta Family YMCA or learn more at ymcaatlanta.org. Get to know your why. All right, so Brian, we're back, and I want to ask you, everything that goes up must come down. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's fair to say we are overdue for a downturn in the commercial real estate?
That was a good question.
business?
That's something that Mr. Shiver this morning spoke directly to. And I'd like to cover a few points from a nationwide, then boiling it down to Alpharetta. So nationwide, we have the lowest unemployment we've ever had across the board. And what's very interesting right now is that we actually have more jobs to fill than we have unemployed people. So the economy is really, really booming nationwide. On top of that, the U.S. is the number one oil producer in the world. We produce more light crude oil than anybody in the world, which has some significant, obviously, positives for our economy. That's one thing that's driving our oil prices down. We're not near as dependent on foreign oil. And so that's helping us go forward. And so from just a state standpoint, Georgia's the sixth in the list of top 10 of in-migration into the state. So you see people flooding into Georgia, and of course, where are they coming? Well, a lot of them are coming to Alpharetta because Alpharetta has the average, almost twice the average household income in the state. It's a booming area, like things we talked about earlier. Infrastructure, schools are fabulous. And housing starts are stable here and in Forsyth County. And you typically see, the housing starts, in other words, permits for new housing, are keeping pretty much with the demographic demand for population moving in. And what we saw in the recession was they were getting a little out of hand. The housing starts were way up here, and population growth was down here. Now they're really riding along together. So those are some very good points that show us that things are moving in the right direction. And one thing that I thought was key, I've been hearing this too about, is it time for a correction? Aren't we headed toward a recession? And, his point was really that recessions we only have a recession to they only happen when there's an imbalance in something. And he said there's no imbalance right now. Everything is balanced. So what Ken said this morning, which really hit home to me, I was feeling a little bit pessimistic because of things I've been hearing in the marketplace. But what he said was that that he thinks we'll have steady growth going on, and everything. We don't have to have a recession. There's nothing in economics that say, well, you have to have a recession every 7 years, because that's what people tell us. But that doesn't necessarily happen if you have other outside influences. So we think from what the economists are telling us that we may have a slowdown in the phenomenal great growth rate we have in Alpharetta and call it North Fulton, South Forsyth. But just to say we have a slowdown is not a recession. Right. It's just we're growing so crazy right now that it may slow down some, but we're not heading toward a recession. There's nothing that shows that, unless there's some kind of outside influence, from a security threat, national security threat. But at the moment, there's really no signs that we're heading toward a recession.
And what's vacancy rate right now in the metro area?
Depends on which area you're talking about. Whether you're talking about office or retail.
Okay.
I don't know the exact numbers for office or retail vacancy rates in Alpharetta. I can tell you what we're seeing a lot though is the tertiary, what would I call tertiary, which are sort of the third level. From what I'm seeing, most of the prime Alpharetta stuff, land, buildings are just about eaten up by developers. Okay, that the horse is out of the barn on those. So what you're starting to see now are people really buying the lots and the buildings that have been overlooked for the past 5 to 10 years. And they're starting to say, okay, Alpharetta is growing so much, we need to be in this market somehow. Maybe it's not right in downtown, maybe it's a half mile north or half mile south, but you're starting to see that. You start to see projects, for instance, the Maxwell project that's mixed use, got some apartments, got some retail. That building has been sitting there for like it is 50 years, and just this year, I guess a couple months ago, they started tearing that down, got permits, ready to start building that mixed use development, and that is, I guess, a half mile to 3/4 mile south of downtown. 3 or 4 years ago, nobody wanted to touch it because it wasn't downtown. But now that downtown footprint is starting to really spread out, and people are buying up those outer market property plays.
Have we seen $1 million an acre in the downtown area?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So have we peaked?
I just sold a piece of property, 0.97 acres, for $1 million, roughly slightly under $1,380,000.
Uh-huh.
And it was just basically a dirt play. It was a little house tear down right across from the Methodist Church on Highway 9. Just closed a couple weeks ago, and that's $1.5 million an acre.
That's incredible.
Incredible sale. So yeah, we're seeing that. That doesn't mean you'll get that for every piece. It really depends. A lot of that value is based upon a new road potentially going through there, as well as what zoning that they thought they could get, mixed use zoning. So you got to be careful. the piece next door to it may not be worth near that much. So you just have to make sure you know what you're doing from that standpoint. But yeah, we're seeing, of course, the hotel site on Milton went for a really big number per acre. So yeah, we're seeing, I've asked a lot of people, where do you think we are in the bell curve? Where you got prices going up and down. Most people think we're at the top or near the top, but they don't think we're going to see a drop off. So I think they're right. I think what we're seeing is, we're getting close to the top, but we're going to have a plateau and maybe slightly going up. I don't see how we could see, in the past year we've seen prices double,
Yeah.
So I don't think we'll see those kind of
You
increases.
don't see $2 million an acre? You wish.
Yeah, it's all a derivative of how much density you can get on the site and what the rent is.
Sure.
What the rent is. But I mean, we're seeing rents that 5 years ago, if you told people, they said, "No way, can you get rents like that in downtown Alpharetta?" We're seeing $35 a square foot rents, and people are paying it. And we'll see if they make it. As long as people keep coming and eating at the restaurants and buying things that they're selling, those rents will stay up. And we're not too far. The downtown part's not too far off from Avalon. And I was saying, rising tide raises all boats. That's what Avalon's done. You create such synergy and such demand in Avalon, it can't help but to raise everything else, because right. It's human nature. If you go as a retailer, you go there and say, okay, they want $45 a square foot plus $15 triple net charges, so where it's $60 a square foot. Well, I can't pay that, but I might could pay $40 downtown Alpharetta, or I might could pay $45 or $50 across the street from Avalon. So that's why it raises it. It's just human nature. You got such a high threshold in Avalon, everything else comes up closer to it.
All right, I want to switch gears with you just a little bit, and I'm going to ask you, you mentioned this earlier, and it's going to be a loaded question, so take it in any direction you'd like. The phenomena known as overemployment. There's more jobs than we have workers to fill. You have a lot of clients who employ a lot of people. And in parallel to the commercial real estate growth, we're also seeing increased prices in the North Fulton, Metro Atlanta area on the residential side as well. And in a lot of cases, driving away what many people would refer to as the working class of our country. And I know, I'll give you one example. I know in Alpharetta, we have firefighters who live in Alabama, and they commute to Alpharetta from Alabama and live here for 4 days and then go home. Give me any thoughts that you have on how that might affect the economy generally, but then more specifically your industry in the commercial real estate.
Well, I think
market.
there's some things we still don't know. There's two big things out there that we don't know how they're going to affect unemployment. So number one is artificial intelligence. What you're reading lately is that we're going to lose 80% of the jobs or something by, I don't know what year, 2030, something like that. So a lot of those manual jobs, you're already starting to see it. You go to McDonald's. I don't know if where's the nearest McDonald's? Anyway, a lot of McDonald's. Okay, a lot of McDonald's you go to now, there's fewer people working because you punch it in the screen, you order it yourself. I know this one on Windward has that. So artificial intelligence is going to take manual rote jobs out of existence. We just don't know how that's going to happen or how fast it's going to happen, but it's going to happen.
And how many?
The other thing is what happens to immigration, and how many of those immigrants that are coming across the border can fill what kind of jobs we have years from now. We just don't. I don't think we know those answers yet because we don't know what those jobs are going to be like. Obviously, a lot of those immigrants typically are service type employees. It's hard. Most of those service jobs probably going to stay in effect because it's something AI can't really do. The other question I have from you're talking about affordable housing. That's a hard one to grasp. To me, it starts with how do you define affordable housing?
Right. Alpharetta City Council had this conversation recently about a development that were high threes, low fours. I don't know that you'll meet many people who would classify that as affordable housing, but it's all about your perspective.
It is about perspective, and that's one thing. I tell a story in my book, plug my book, Mailbox Moolah, and that's how I got started in real estate. I started buying real estate, and the way the first property I bought was actually the house I was living in, and I kept it. Went and bought another house to live in. My friends at the time were asking me, "Well, why don't you sell that and so you can buy a bigger house?" I said, "Well, I guess you wouldn't understand because that's not what I'm about. I'm trying to build, a net worth and build for my future." And I think part of the problem is the American psyche thinks, I've got to have, 3 or 4,000 square foot house. I got to have a nice car. We got to have 2 cars. I got to have a golf cart on the side. I got to have, all these things I got to have.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, well, I can't afford housing. Well, maybe if you didn't have all those gotta haves, you could afford housing. So I know there are people that can't afford housing, and there is an affordable housing issue. I'm not sure it's as big as some people like to think it is. I think it's, to some degree, it's the American mentality. I mean, my wife's parents lived in a house for 40 years, and up until we got married in the 90s, they lived in this house that was 900 square feet. 900 square feet. That's like 2 garages, okay?
Mm-hmm.
A garage is 400 to 450 square feet.
I think this room is 400 square
feet. So it's like twice the size of this.
Yeah.
And they lived in it for 40-something years. Can you imagine how many American newlyweds would think that would be appropriate for them to live in a 900 square foot house? They think you're absolutely out of your mind. And so, first-time home buyer houses keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like 3,000 square feet for first-time home buyer house.
Sure.
So now, I don't know if that's the market driving that, builders driving that, lending driving that. I'm not sure what's driving that, but I think the days of thinking that everybody's got to have a 3,000 square foot house, may be over. I think I sent your dad a link to this tiny house thing,
Yes.
article I saw. That was
He's
fabulous.
obsessed with that stuff.
That is awesome. And I think it's like $20,000.
Mm-hmm.
They build these little tiny houses, and they're probably about the size of this room, maybe a little bit smaller. So I think we have to start looking at maybe that's where we should be going. The problem is, you're talking about city councils and
Mm-hmm.
the public. You take that kind of project to the public in general, they will eat you alive.
Mm-hmm.
They won't want to see something like that. But yet they complain about affordable housing. Well, affordable housing is about getting some higher densities and allowing smaller houses, and it's a catch.
And traffic. And complain about traffic.
Yeah, and complain about traffic.
Yeah.
So, well, we can't have that here, so let them move up to Dawsonville. Okay, so they move up to Dawsonville where they can get the zoning, and they got to drive back and forth, so it creates sprawl. So there's a lot of, it's not an easy issue
No, it's not.
to resolve because of those kind of concerns. And
So, and maybe this is a little bit in the weeds, but I know there has been discussion about government subsidies at a local level in some way, shape, or form to offset some of the pricing of housing in the Alpharetta area. What's your take on that?
Well, don't we have government subsidies already? Section 8 housing?
Sure. Municipally funded government subsidies.
You know what I think about that.
Well, give it to me. Give our readers your take on it.
We subsidize too much stuff already. It should be market driven.
So you don't think it's a solution, an efficient solution for a workforce problem if you're looking to specifically address a workforce problem?
Again, I think we're trying to solve a problem that is not as big of a problem as we think, and could be resolved if we would, if we have a little political backbone and solve it in different ways. Throwing money at it from the taxpayer, I don't think, is the answer.
Okay. I got one more question for you, and then I want you to plug some stuff. Again, going back to, you have a lot of clients who are developers, and we talked a little bit about the workforce. what are they seeing in the market as hurdles to getting some of their projects done? Are they missing framers? Are they missing welders? Are they missing electricians? Where are the gaps in what we need to continue to grow as an area?
Well, it's a good question. I guess, construction costs continue just to move up and up. I was talking to somebody this morning who's looking at buying an industrial building that's $160 or so a square foot to build. That's what he's going to pay. 5-6 years ago, you could buy it for $80 or $90 a square foot. The reason is steel tariffs. The reason is construction labor keeps going up. So that's always an issue, is finding skilled construction laborers. Now, whether those are welders or framers, I'm not sure. But certainly construction costs keep going up. And that's really, I guess that's a good thing, because we're in a great economy. If we were in a bad economy, all that would be cheaper. And we see this, every time we have a hurricane down south, and lumber prices, sheetrock prices shoot up 20-30%, and that inflationary pressure on them, very rarely does it come down back as much. So that just keeps lifting that cost of product as we have those kind of major hurricanes. So you combine all that, and you keep seeing. That's why real estate's so wonderful to own, because it never gets cheaper. Land doesn't get cheaper because they're not making more of it.
Unless you live in China.
Yeah, or I guess they make it out of sand and in the sea. But so that is that's an important thing to think about from that standpoint. That that continued rise. That's why the real estate, owning existing real estate, is wonderful, because you very rarely see real estate values drop very much. Obviously, the Great Recession we did, but you didn't see that as much in the Alpharetta area. Mm-hmm. You did see some reduction in values, but certainly not like where we saw elsewhere in the country. Just because we've had steady increases and not huge increases like they had in California and other areas. Alpharetta is just a steady climb. Georgia in particular. And a lot of that has to do with the migration we've had, that sort of thing. Great weather.
Sure.
And, fairly good, fairly low taxes, and a good business environment.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to leave it there. Brian, I want to thank you for coming on the show. You're the best in the biz, so you offer a lot of great perspective on this. I'm going to plug your podcast, Real Estate Success with Brian Patton, on the App and Podcast Network. Just wrapped up season 1. We'll be kicking off season 2 here very soon. But what else you got to plug?
BrianPattonCommercial.com.
Okay.
BrianPattonCommercial.com.
And you've written a couple books.
Yeah, Mailbox Moolahs on Amazon. We hit number one, top 100 in Amazon back in January for our real estate books. So check that out. Written 3 or 4 other books, but that's the number 1 book that we've got right now. And that's available on mailboxmoolah.com as well, or you can find it on my website, brianpatcommercial.com. If you want to call me about real estate, give me a call at 770-634-4848, 770-634-4848.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank the Ed Isaacson Alpharetta Family YMCA for sponsoring today's episode. Reminder, there is this month they are waiving the join fee, so that's a savings of $100. Brian, thanks for being on the show today, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.